everyone. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Danielle Coe. I'm the CEO and founder of Black Women in Clinical Research. The mission of Black Women in Clinical Research is to educate, empower, support, and help Black women thrive in the clinical research industry. Tonight, we are here to talk about clinical research finance. And first, I'm going to start with introducing my host, Rashida Hall. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Rashida Hall. I am based out of Tennessee, very close to Nashville. I've been in the clinical research industry for about 11 years now. The bulk of my career was being a CRA, and now I have recently transitioned into project management. Thank you everyone for being on the call.
Thank you so much, Rashida. And also we have Andrika Thomas. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I am Andrika Thomas, calling in from New York City, Brooklyn, New York, to be exact. I've been in the clinical research industry for about 7 years. I started in the clinical laboratory, and now I'm currently a pediatric oncology project manager for a cancer center. So welcome to you all. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you so much, Andrika. And now we're going to introduce our speakers. Mary, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Mary Veazie. I am the Executive Director of Clinical Research Finance at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. I have been in clinical research 20 years in the directorship of clinical research for the last 15 years.
Thank you so much, Mary. And Victoria.
Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Johnson, Assistant Director of Clinical Research Finance at MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, Texas. I work very closely with Mary Veazie, and so happy to be talking with you guys today. I've got about 7 years of clinical research finance experience under my belt.
Thank you, Victoria. So we're going to go ahead and dive in with the questions. We like to do it like with Black Women in Clinical Research. We like to give the members an opportunity to ask some of the questions, that they might have never had a chance to ask someone that's involved in clinical research finance. So one of the first questions that we have is, can you please describe what is clinical research finance in your opinion? Mary?
Sure, happy to do that. So it's basically the financial aspects of clinical research. The coverage analysis is a big document and it's the actual foundation of a clinical research billing program and ensuring compliance around that. So it starts with that coverage analysis and moves into the budgeting processes. That negotiation process that probably many of you do with sponsors is also part of that financial aspect of it. And then finally, the billing pieces, which Victoria actually does, because her strong suit is the revenue cycle. So she brings to us not only the revenue cycle of a organization, but the clinical research revenue cycle of an organization. So basically making sure that we bill the appropriate parties for the charges after the patient is seen in the clinics. Victoria, did I miss anything? You're on mute, sweetie.
Classic Zoom mistakes, right? I'm double muted. So I said, no, I think you got it covered.
Okay, sounds good. So I know a lot of times when people are trying to transition from other industries, they're not really always aware of what the entry-level positions are. Could you tell us some of the entry-level positions that are available in the clinical research finance?
Sure, I'll start off and then Victoria will take the post-award side. So we have pre and post-award positions. So our pre-award team is really the coverage analysis team because we do all our coverage analysis at MD Anderson centrally. That team is made up of of actually MDs from foreign countries, research nurses who don't want to do the patient-facing pieces anymore, sometimes study coordinators, but they have actually helped us interpret these scientific documents into financial documents, and we just teach them the billing aspects of it. From a budgeting perspective, it is usually a strong financial analyst that we have actually taught how to do an appropriate budget for a study, because financial analysts that just come out of a normal hospital setting don't necessarily have the skill sets to understand the requirements of a study and thus budget accordingly. So we have to teach them a little bit of that. But truly a strong financial analyst can usually do the job once we've trained them accordingly. And then I'll pass it to Victoria to talk about the post-award side.
Sure, thank you, Mary. I think on the post-award side, probably entry level for us would be in our clinical research billing team. Would require someone who has a background in maybe medical billing and coding, someone who's really easily able to understand and differentiate between CPT codes. For the rest of the post-award functionalities, they are trainable. So we do look for people who have that background. Also in revenue cycle, there is a large portion of revenue cycle knowledge that is needed in terms of clinical research billing, just to make sure that we're billing the appropriate parties and being able to split those charges between a sponsor and maybe an insurance, and then also to answer any questions that may be coming from a patient as they question things that are happening on the research protocol that they're participating in. And then we also have maybe some basic accountant type positions that oversee or that deal hands-on day-to-day with reconciliation of like your general accounts and making sure that your financials are in order in terms of your research study accounts.
Okay, sounds good. That's like with medical coding. I know that we have a lot of different people that's in the group that have, a background and they're not really sure about getting into clinical research. So that's really good to know that that's an option for people that are in, like in the medical field, but would like to transition. So can you guys tell us what a typical day would be in your role? Victoria, you started smiling. I'm about to say,
really
Victoria started smiling.
There's no typical day. Kelly Teeler is actually on the call too, and she actually works with us at Anderson. And Kelly and Victoria kind of laughed just like I did, because there's really no typical day. I used to, when I first got into clinical research, used to have my to-do list, and being the anal retentive accountant I was like, okay, I got to get this done today. And quickly realized that to-do list was just getting longer and longer because something would happen and I'd have to go take care of an issue or talk to a faculty member, because oftentimes they believe their clinical practice is exactly what we get paid for, and it's really not the case. So clinical practice versus billing are two very different things. So we had to teach them that. And so a typical day is basically putting out fires, working with our faculty to help them understand the financial aspects of their protocol, them actually teaching us sometimes what they do clinically, and then we're trying to match it on the billing side to see if we can actually bill for that. And then sometimes it requires us to go into our electronic health record and work with that team and be very innovative as to how we can get certain tests done within the clinical operations, because for some studies just don't fit in the clinical setting very well. So how can we modify the clinical setting a little bit to actually accommodate some of these studies, especially as we saw trends around inpatient stays, for example. That's a big one. And we can't split bill a charge between a sponsor and an insurance carrier when the patient's inpatient. So Victoria, myself, and I, and others have actually worked on a process that we can actually now split bill. So it requires innovation. So the reason why I've stayed here this long is because I love the job. I've learned something new every single day that I have actually been in this role. And the day I stop learning is the day I'll probably decide, okay, it's time for me to retire or move on to different pastures. But a typical day is just learning everything we can absorb and understanding how to get these clinical research studies into operations. Victoria, you want to add anything?
No, but I definitely agree with you. I often say we're like firefighters. We're constantly putting out a fire all day, every day. And then there's a level of creativity, I think, that comes with the job where we really do have to think outside of the box. Because when you think of research, research is new. Clinical research is bringing new innovative treatment and therapies to the patient's bedside. And so sometimes that requires us thinking about how we do things differently in day-to-day operations and how creative we can be to get some of these things done. So I would agree with Mary, it's definitely a fun job. It's definitely challenging, requires some creativity, but you do get a lot of flexibility to kind of do things that you might not be able to do. And you also get to see and experience things that you may not be able to see and experience in a normal, everyday hospital environment.
So a typical day is not typical. Okay.
Not at all. Not at all.
I'm about to say putting out fires and,
Mhm.
that's very, I know, we usually don't hear that perspective, with someone. And so I think that's really good that people can, hear that you pretty much, I'm really starting to think that within the clinical research industry, whatever position that you're in, you really have to be a jack of all trades to be able to, okay, I have to focus on this, or okay, now let me think fast. And so I can, accomplish this goal and meet these deadlines. So thank you, ladies, so much. I'm going to pass it over to Rashida.
Thank you. I love the passion and excitement that you two women have for your jobs. And Mary, just hearing you talk about being innovative and having to be creative, and one of the reasons why you've stayed where you are for so long really does make an impact on how you feel about your job and how excited you get about, your everyday life, because a lot of the times we don't realize how much time we actually spend at work. And so being able to use your brain and be creative and be innovative is always such a great thing. So my question is, what is your journey within finance and then also within the clinical research space? I would love to hear kind of your story, because I think that helps a lot of our members, especially ones who are relatively new to clinical research or who have the finance background, but not necessarily the clinical research background. So can each of you go through that for me? And I'm gonna ask Victoria to answer this one first.
Sure. So my background is in revenue cycle. I stumbled into clinical research and haven't stumbled out quite yet. So I started off, I have about 20 years of experience in revenue cycle, mainly in hospital setting, patient business office. And when I started my career at MD Anderson, I started off in the business office and I inherited a team of clinical research billers. And I knew nothing about clinical research billing at the time. So my introduction to clinical research was very different. But it was something that I wanted to do because it was something I didn't know already when I got here. So I looked up and applied for a position on Mary's team and got hired, and I transferred over to her department, and I haven't looked back since. And so I've used the background that I have in revenue cycle to really help to let's say grow and build the clinical research billing team that we have today, and bring some new innovative ways of thinking about clinical research billing and what that impact looks like on the coverage analysis and what those budgeting impacts would look like as well.
I've heard a lot of people say that they have stumbled into clinical research and they did not find a reason to leave. So I love that we kind of just find our way through it. And I know a lot of people, now are really trying to actively push their way into clinical research. And so Mary, can you tell me your background and kind of how you have gotten to where you are now?
Sure. So I am a CPA by trade. I had to do 2 years in public accounting so I can hold myself out to the public as a CPA. Quickly realized that was not my forte, because you had to keep track of your hours and minutes. And I was the one that they were hunting down every week to submit timesheets. So I would literally make that up because I didn't keep the track of the time. And I did my 2 years and said, I'm done. I can't have to go. This is not what I want to do. And then I went into oil and gas, coming from Louisiana into Houston. One of the first places you probably look for at that time was really the oil and gas industry, because there was plentiful jobs and whatnot. So I actually was working in internal audit at Shell, oil and gas company, but they wanted me to move around and actually move in order to climb the corporate ladder there, and move from Houston to, say, the United Kingdom and any other international place. While that sounded great, I had 2 young kids at the time, and I refused to uproot them and have them exposed that way, or even have to make new friends every 3 to 5 years. And so I said, I'm just going to sacrifice my career and figure out something else. My husband was working at MD Anderson, and he said, you should try the healthcare industry. I applied at Anderson, and actually I applied on 9/11. Actually, I interviewed on 9/11 at MD Anderson, which was interesting because I'm so busy focusing on my interview and nervous about the interview for a director position of research administration. And they're talking to me about the fact that we just were under attack by, and our Twin Towers were hit. And I was like, what are you talking about? I had no clue of what was going on. And then when I walked into the actual interview, the guy that was interviewing me actually had the TV on, and we talked more about the actual events that were happening on 9/11 versus the interview process or me as a candidate. I subsequently got the job, and I haven't looked back since. Really kind of started being curious about the clinical research studies, the clinical trials, trying to connect the dots. And of course, the CPA brain comes out and says, this has got to fit together somehow. Who's paying for it was my first question, and just kind of begin to entrench myself into the regulations and understanding the billing aspects of it. Really kind of taught myself everything I know today, because there really wasn't anyone at MD Anderson at the time really supporting that effort. And I built the team that we have today at Anderson through that knowledge base, and with the help of our compliance office, because they were really excited that somebody was embracing the regulations and really trying to make them compliant. So that's my story, and that's kind of why I never looked back and really just enjoyed my job each and every day.
That's a colorful story. Wow. And I think all of us remember where we were when September 11 happened. I was in band class, and we thought the whole world was ending. So we panicked, and we had to get shipped back to our regular school, and all the, TVs were on and reporting everything. So yeah, I don't think you'll ever forget that was the day that you got into clinical research as well.
Agreed. Yep.
So hearing your YouTube backgrounds, what advice can you give someone in helping them figure out what background is required for what you do in finance for clinical research?
Oh, that's a hard one. So if they're interested in the budgeting aspects of it, I would say having an accounting degree or having some sense of knowledge around the accounting pieces and that reconciliation side Victoria talked about, I think is important. If you're wanting to focus on the actual coverage analysis development and understanding the Medicare billing rules and what we should be billing out to insurance versus what we shouldn't be, that really, in my opinion, you had to have some science background, because you need to really interpret that clinical research study, which is totally science-based, into a financial document. And that's the big lift. And I think that's the biggest hurdle, and probably the unique position that many of these analysts hold around building a coverage analysis, because I call them unicorns. Truly, they have a unique skill set that many people, it takes a while to garner. When we actually hire a clinical research analyst to help us with the coverage analysis build, it takes us anywhere between 6 to 9 months before they actually make an impact on our workflow. It takes that long to get them up to speed, and it really depends on their background. Some of them come to us with clinical research experience, so the learning curve is a little less. Some of them have that strong science background, but have not really focused on clinical research before. Maybe they came from a basic science setting. We have a couple of people who came from the lab, and that took a while to get them up to speed because they understood the science, but teaching them the actual billing aspects and the overall clinical research cycle took a while. So that's kind of what I would recommend on the pre-award side. Victoria, you want to talk about the post-award side and that charge review with clinical research billing?
Sure. I think on the post-award side, having an understanding of how clinical operations work is super beneficial. There are a multitude of things that come when a patient is being seen in is being treated on a clinical research study. And so as you're reviewing charges, it's imperative that you understand how normal clinical operations works and where the research aspects kind of fit into that space. You're looking at charges, there are hundreds of them that could be coming through, and you're really trying to make sure you're doing your due diligence to not bill the patient and or the sponsor incorrectly. So it really requires you to kind of know what to expect. What happens when a patient goes in for a biopsy? What happens when a patient goes in for a surgical procedure? Because your coverage determination isn't always going to have every single thing that you should expect to see. The coverage analysis is an estimate of what you expect to happen to a patient, but when the patient actually seen in clinic, being able to distinguish that a clinic visit level 1 is the same as a clinic visit level 5 is the same thing, and that this biopsy is specifically for the protocol or not for the protocol is super important. So I think having an understanding of hospital operations or clinical operations, and then really having a good grasp of your CPT coding and what some of those billing regulations are. I think I spend probably, and maybe my team spends most of their time justifying why we make decisions the way we do, and kind of using that information and giving it back to the coverage analysis team to say, hey, here's what we can or can't do. Here's what the billing regulations allow us to do in terms of claims billing. I think understanding of claims is super important, because there are some things that you can do clinically, but that doesn't equate to payment. There are some things that are restricted for billing to insurance, and there's certain guidelines you have to follow, certain edits that you have to make sure are satisfied. So I think that entire background, or at least pieces of that background, makes it easier for you to understand and kind of grow and figure out where you fit at in the clinical research finance space.
That's really good to know. Because I have so BWICR has a mentoring program, and I have a few mentees who have the finance background, and I personally don't know anyone in the financial sector. So hearing this information, I'm definitely going to direct them to this panel discussion, just so they can have a better idea of what they could do with the background that they have. So my next question is, and it's kind of related to this one here, but what are some specific roles outside of your titles that correlate to the corporate accounting manager role within clinical research?
So we have a manager of over our post-award side and of the coverage analysis team. We have a manager over our budgeting aspect, because our portfolio is really large. So you can have a manager position over both of those sides. And Victoria actually has a manager under her as well for the charge review, because MD Anderson has like over 2,000 active clinical trials that are actually touching a patient and patient facing and impacting the patient's bill. And so depending on the size of the organization, you can easily have a manager role that equates to that corporate one that you're speaking about.
And then Victoria, do you have any insight to that?
No, I would agree with Mary. I think there's so much opportunity, and maybe depending on the size of your organization and where those job titles fall, I think there is opportunity for many different roles to end up in that manager space, or that corporate accounting manager position that you spoke of. So as Mary stated, there's she has one for coverage analysis, there's one over the budget. And I think you have to, especially in clinical research finance, carve those positions out into unique groups, because the work is intertwined but so very, very different. It requires a very specialized focus in each of those areas. So I think that in any space, you could have a manager pre-award and post-award, one over the coverage analysis budget and someone else over your billing team. And there's so many other post-award functions that many people don't think about. But in terms of an accounting manager, manager over your financial accounts that often have to kind of reconcile to make sure that you're collecting your money from the sponsor as well. So I think that there's plenty of opportunity there.
Thank you so much. And that was actually my last question. So Andrika, you can take over now.
Hey, ladies, you're doing a fantastic job. I just wanted to say that. So within your roles, you work closely with project managers sometimes in terms of budgets. So what methods are used, or would you say you use, to overcome challenges with the PMs and them staying in budget?
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
Sorry. What methods are used to overcome challenges with the PM and them staying within the budget?
Well, we really we don't really focus on them staying within the budget because oftentimes we've noticed at the beginning that they've under budgeted and negotiated something that they really financially can't support because the study requires so much more. So for example, a study should be maybe a $25,000 per patient type of study, but they've only budgeted $20,000. We'll make that notation at the beginning before we allow that study to activate. And oftentimes, because of the gap that we've defined, we will ask them for a chart fill string so that they reconcile it. So really at our organization, we require that the PI cover the deficits at the end of the day. And so some of our PIs have surplus dollars from grateful patients, or they have surplus dollars from other clinical research studies that they've closed out over the years. And so we make them use what we call that slush fund to cover that deficit. So it really behooves them to try to budget based on the study requirements and really stay within that budget, because at the end of the day, we're going to ask them to cover the deficit.
Thank you. Victoria, did you want to add anything to that?
I'll add just a few things. We do spend quite a bit of time attempting to educate them up front.
Educate me, please.
You said attempting to.
Quite a bit of time attempting to educate up front. And I think making sure that they really understand, at least in terms of patient care, right? That it costs a lot of money for patients to be seen at a hospital. And so it's imperative that they make sure that their sponsors are covering the cost of their research studies, and that their institution is not supporting the cost, especially in terms of their patient care. So where they may be able to give a little bit or negotiate a little bit more in their salaries and pull from slush funds, your hospital's charges are what they are, and there's not a lot of room to negotiate or change those. So I think we spend a lot of time educating on why our charges are the way they are, what they should charge for certain services, and then making sure that we say, hey, this is what it costs. Ultimately, as Mary said, it's their decision on what they agree to with the sponsor. But at the end of the day, I am holding the stick, and I will say, hey, I'm billing you anyway, and I expect you to collect that money for the sponsor. And then when they don't, that the conversation between them and the investigator who is ultimately responsible for the study, because we're expecting that money to be received anyway.
Yeah, and I'll add one more piece to that. If Victoria jarred something in my head, that we're actually trying to educate them. So Kelly Taylor is actually leading an effort at our organization where we're doing negotiate. We're actually bringing someone in to teach the negotiation techniques to certain individuals who actually haven't been able to be trained in that area. So that's been really helpful because we're teaching them not only how to really negotiate with sponsors, and that sponsors will tell you whatever they like to tell you so they can reduce the cost as much as possible, because their objective is to really make sure that they keep as much money in their coffer as possible. And so we're teaching them that aspect, but we're also teaching them about your brand, because the sponsor is coming to you because they want the data. They want the rich patient population that you have. And so never undersell your brand is another thing that we're actually trying to educate them on as well.
Great, thank you. These are all great tips. Someone who is new to project management and at a medical institution, these are great tips, so I thank you. So in terms of job seeking, we are often trying to figure out ways to make ourselves the best candidate for the roles. So are there any courses or certifications that would make you a great candidate for the clinical research finance positions?
Unfortunately, there's not a lot of classes out there for clinical research finance. I have actually started this endeavor to try to bolster that because you see you have the ACRP who has the CCRA, was it CCRP, you don't really have a clinical research finance certification, which is actually needed because it is a very complicated job as we're kind of describing to you, but also it really takes years to master it. And Victoria can kind of vouch for that because she's been working with me, I think 5 years now, or maybe going on 6. But we're still learning. She was still learning some things of how this process works. And so it takes a while to master that. And so that is one of my initiatives, is to try to increase the education out there, but also have some sort of certification program that will help people garner those skill sets. And thus, when they apply for a job, that individual or that hiring manager will see that they have acquired that skill set and are a great candidate for the position. Victoria?
Sorry, I'm losing my audio. I apologize. What was the question?
We were talking about any certifications or courses that makes you a great candidate
Yes.
for the clinical. Yes, go ahead.
Sorry about that. I was getting like every other word. Sorry. I would agree with Mary. There's not a lot out there in terms of courses. And so while we are doing our best to try to figure out ways to fill that gap, there's just really not a lot out there. So I think having those certifications that already exist under your belt to really help you understand the clinical research arena is a good place to start if you have no experience at all. And then using different sorts of, from a poster word perspective, having a certified CPC under your belt really helps to kind of show your understanding in that space of CPT codes. And so for people like me who may be hiring for positions for my clinical research billing team, there are certain things that I already know I may have to teach you clinical research, knowing that you already have CPT or CPC coding certifications under your belt really helps to solidify that you've spent the time understanding the CPT code or the billing and coding aspects. And so I can spend more time focused on the clinical research thing. So I do, I kind of agree with Mary. It's just kind of an unfulfilled space right now that we need to figure out a way to kind of fill that gap.
Thank you. And so can you tell us about the number of projects or studies you manage at once?
So our organization is a large organization. It's 22,000 people and I think 1,800 clinicians. So I think we have right at 5,000 active clinical research studies, but those that actually touch and impact a patient's bill and thus would cause us risk to be non-compliant around clinical research billing, I'm going to ask Victoria to address because that's the part that she manages.
I checked just this morning and we're about 2,700. I checked this number more than any normal person should, but we're about 2,700 active clinical trials that are patient-facing, where charges are being generated and we are having to distinguish between sponsor and patient insurance on those trials. So it's a very large portfolio to manage.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I'll send it back over to you.
Okay, thank you so much, ladies. So I guess, are you up for answering more questions, or let's see if the audience, because we do have a couple of more questions if you guys are interested. So a lot of times I know that the questions the members ask, what does the forecasting look like for the year, for the month, for the week when it comes to clinical research, finance?
Very bright. Victoria just told you how large our portfolio is, but I don't see it slowing down. And even, if you think about the pandemic and how many clinical trials they had to do just to get the vaccine up and running, that is a big indicator that this clinical research space is always growing. And if the clinical research space is always growing because we're trying to find various cures, various drugs to help mitigate certain types of illnesses, especially eradicate cancer, it's going to clinical research finance is needed. So it's a growing area, which is why I really want to try to address some of the education gaps because of that growing area and the need that will be there long term.
Victoria?
Yeah, I would agree with Mary. I think the landscape of healthcare is an ever-changing thing. And so in order for investigators to bring new novel therapies to patients, whether it be cancer related or some other chronic illness that they need to find new drugs or new cures for, there's always going to be a need for clinical research finance. There's, I think, even a greater need now that research is really intertwined in our, normal everyday patient clinical care. So I think that it will continue to grow. And there's always going to be a need for a level of expertise there to make sure that hospitals are compliant in how they are billing services and making sure that their institutions are protected from a financial perspective and that sponsors are getting what they need, but that they're also being compensated appropriately for their services.
Thank you. So when it comes to sponsors, how involved are you guys with the sponsors? Are you, saying, hey, where's my money? So how exactly, like y'all like rents do, where's the money at? So just kind of tell us, how does that look?
Well, we don't actually collect the dollars. We have a grants and contracts department that does that aspect of it, and they collect the revenue from not only clinical research studies, but basic science. So they take care of all the payments coming in for the organization. From a sponsor phase perspective, we really get involved at the beginning, working with the departments and the sponsors to say to them, not, hey, where's my money, but hey, why are you lowballing me on this budget? So those type of conversations, we have to jump in and help the departments really get the right amount from the patient from the sponsor up front, as opposed to trying to go back and do amendments to increase the budget at the end of the day.
I don't know. I just thought of this question. So can you tell me about a time, if you can talk about it, like what would you say was your most difficult sponsor, and what, I would say, what was the struggle and what made this sponsor so difficult? If that, I'm just curious.
I can't say the sponsor's name, but
not name, but just, like it was a situation, I'm just curious, because a lot of times we don't hear this, you don't have to say any names, of course, never say names, but just a situation that you were like, oh my goodness, this was difficult, or just this process, or something that you just really never encountered.
Yeah, it was both the PI and the actual sponsor who were difficult in this situation, because it was an investigational agent. And the sponsor kept wanting to, and there was an inpatient stay with it, and the sponsor kept wanting to say, we just can bill insurance for this. It's typical. And it's like, no, it's not. And so just having them understand, first of all, you can't split bill and inpatient stays. Secondly, investigational agent is investigational agent. FDA has not approved it, and therefore we have to get you to pay for that piece of it. And then the PI did not help it, because he was in the background going, but yeah, I agree with the sponsor. And oh my God, both of y'all are nuts. But anyway, so that's usually that. Actually, that's that was our typical day for a long time. And Victoria can tell you that was our typical day for a while. It has actually calmed down a lot since then. And I think coupled with our president and our chief scientific officer, they have actually talked to a lot of our PIs about financial stewardship and really making better uses of our resources, and also making sure that we're actually covering our costs is another initiative that is that our president put on the backs of the department chairs as well as our division heads. And so that has actually helped us a lot. But in the past, it was pretty difficult to try to get these studies and sponsors and PIs to really understand from a billing perspective, we couldn't do certain things that they wanted us to do. Victoria, you want to add anything? Because you probably got even better stories than I have about the post-award side.
I have a lot. So I think usually when we get involved with the sponsor, as Mary said, it's usually we try to do it up front. It's because maybe the department is stuck in budget negotiations and they just can't come to an agreement. I think a majority of the time it's because sponsors don't have any real life experience in billing and claims and collections. And so they really are kind of green in terms of what you can or cannot do to bill to insurance. So in their head, if they think it's standard of care, you can get paid for it. But anyone who spent any time in a revenue cycle environment knows that just because you can bill for it doesn't mean you're going to collect payment for it. I mean, insurance companies, health insurance companies are just as ruthless and vicious as car insurance companies, right? You can bill them and ask them to pay for things, but that's not a guarantee you're going to get the payment. And I think a lot of times where we get involved is where the sponsor is trying to tell us that this is something you can bill, and we know that on our side, that's not something we can get paid for. So I think more so when we deal with multi-center studies, studies that have different Medicare contractors where they don't understand the differences between what I can do and what another hospital can do. And then often when they're trying to compare prices from organization to organization, we are also very, very different. What MD Anderson charges for a service is not going to be the same as what a hospital in New York may charge for their services. And I think we spend more time trying to explain to them that we're not all the same. And so our costs aren't all the same. And really that's, I think, where we spend most time dealing with the sponsors.
Thank you, ladies. It's just a little curveball. So this is my last question. So what advice would you give to someone who's interested in clinical research finance?
First and foremost, network. You can certainly reach out to me or Victoria. Kelly is a great resource as well. Start picking our brains around, these aspects of it. Understand these regulations, especially the NCD, which is our National Coverage Determination that's issued by Medicare. That's the foundation of everything we do. So beginning to kind of entrench yourself in those regulations, but oftentimes people will read them and go, I don't understand what that means, or I have no idea how to put it into practice, which is where a lot of organizations will stumble. And so I would suggest just beginning to network, looking at classes that are going to conferences and looking for those finance presentations that are few and far between, but they're, those are also valuable places that you could actually start with some conferences as well. Victoria?
I would agree. It's networking. And I think trying to figure out where you could benefit others in the space of clinical research. You have to find your own little special niche, I think. And so you can bring your experience that you've learned and find a spot where you could fill in a gap at an organization. Always be willing to learn, network, as Mary said. And just be, really open to learning something different or outside what you currently know. Every organization is different. How you handle things is going to be different. Sometimes your contracts and your regulations are different. And so just really kind of taking a moment to learn something outside of what you already know. Studying on guidelines, as Mary said, and realizing that there's way more than just the NCD that you need to be aware of. And just try to peel back the layers of the onions. Like I said, I started in revenue cycle and I got most of my understanding of claims and billings and how to read billing guidelines. And even to this day, I learn something new all the time. I don't think I've come across a regulation that I haven't learned something from, even though I've seen it quite a few times. So I think really just spending some time studying the space of clinical research and finance at the same time, and recognizing that there's a whole world of stuff that you can get yourself into in the clinical research space, and just figuring out what works best for you.
All right. Thank you so much, ladies. We are going to take some audience questions. Let's see. Okay. One of the questions that we have, what are you all seeing in the way of retention within clinical research, finance, talent in today's market? What are you doing to combat?
That's a great question. So our retention is probably around 40 to 50%. What's happening right now with us is our CROs and pharmaceutical companies are snatching up our candidates because they can offer them to work from home, which is, now we're actually working from home with this pandemic, but they're also giving us higher salaries. So I'm actually working with our HR team to really address that issue and to try to retain the talent, and so that we can probably come close to matching what pharmaceutical companies and CROs are offering out there.
Okay. So another question that we have, typically, how large is your finance team?
We have a total of 40 people. That includes the management team. We have 9 coverage analysts, 3 budget analysts, and then Victoria, your backside is 10, correct?
I think I have 9 on the clinical research billing and 4 on the reconciliation.
13, okay.
Mm-hmm.
It says, I am a clinical research coordinator at Baylor College of Medicine currently. Currently, I am managing clinical trials and the financing for all of my PI trials. What advice do you have for juggling both roles?
Oh, good luck. Geez. How many studies, I guess, is the first question I would have. But secondly, why can't they hire 2 different roles? Because that's a lot. If you're doing the coordinator role plus the finance role, that is a lot to take care of. And maybe you and I can have an offline conversation since you are in Houston, and we can try to figure out how to help you navigate some of this.
Hey, I'm about to say, what's this person? Let me look at the name. You just might have a new job, Alexis. look what we did.
That's right.
Right. We was just talking about networking, and there you go, new job.
That's it. That
definitely sounds like a lot of work. Yes, come on over to MD Anderson, where the money resides. Okay. So, do you find there are unrealistic deadlines in clinical trial finance?
Yes. I'll speak to the pre-award, and Victoria, you can talk about on the back side of it. But on the pre-award side, our organization is really trying to push us to get these studies activated in 90 days or less. At an academic medical center, that is a difficult task, simply because of all the different parameters and reviews that these studies go through. But also, they were very lean. And so some of these oncology trials are very complex. And the more complex the study is, the longer it's going to take this coverage analysis team to actually develop that coverage analysis and then get the study fully negotiated. So from that perspective, I think some of these are unrealistic if we're not fully staffed. If we're fully staffed and we actually have the resources we need from a FTE perspective, we can hit those deadlines. But if we're lean and one person goes out or gets sick because we're about to hit the big flu season, we get behind the 8 ball really quickly. And so that is the unrealistic expectation I would say have. So I wouldn't say the deadline is unrealistic. I would just say them trying to actually get us to hit the targets with such a slim staff is the unrealistic aspect of it. Victoria?
I think same on the post-award side. While different, the pre-award side is more in the activation space. What we face on the post-award side is the revenue, right? We sit in the dead smack in the middle of the revenue cycle. And so at our organization, we hold up money, right? Money sits in a work queue until my team can clear it. And so if we can't get those charges out of a work queue, that means the institution cannot bill and subsequently cannot collect money. And so while it's not unrealistic, it is a very short window. They're always asking for us to turn more charges through a system with already a very limited set of resources. And so we do the best we can, but it is difficult to do so when you're faced with limited resources and increasing goal month after month. And so I've been very lucky to have a good team. They really always roll up their sleeves and try to do the best that they can. And we are very good at meeting our goals, but they do get very tired because those goals are so short. They're short-term goals, but we require a lot. And so Perhaps if we were fully staffed, then they would feel a little bit better. But I don't say it's unrealistic, just challenging.
I know we mentioned this earlier. I know you said 2,700 was the amount of like the projects that you said. So is it where you guys split up that responsibility, or how does that, or is it just, you know, I guess I'm wondering if you guys kind of like, okay, you're going to be responsible for X amount, like these, you know, like, do you guys split it up, or you're just collectively going like whatever the needs are for that project, you just kind of address it as it happens? How does that?
Victoria, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I think we have 27 active clinical trials. As they come into the department, they are assigned to different analysts. And so on a pre-award side, they just get divvied out to the analyst individually. I think on the post-award side, we have, let's say, a lump sum of charges. We have multiple work queues in which we're going to manage those patients. And so while there are 2,700 active trials, each one of those trials has their own patient enrollment. And so sometimes those patients, there could be 40 patients, 100 patients, whatever the enrollment goals are for that study. And every single time that patient comes into the organization, those charges have to be reviewed to make sure that they don't apply to the protocol. So it is a lot of volume in terms of patient. And so the team is assigned based on alpha split. It gets them more familiar with the patients and how they're coming through the organization and what treatment they may be receiving. But it is still a heavy lift. I don't think I've been on one call with any organization that's figured out the best way to kind of manage how much volume comes in and out associated with these research studies in terms of patient care and what that billing aspect looks like on the back end.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Are decentralized clinical trials affecting your world within finance? If so, what is the overall impact?
So our organization has not embraced decentralized clinical trials just yet. I think they're sitting back and watching the landscape at this point in time, but I know that we're going to have to address that sooner or later. I personally like the convenience that as decentralized clinical trials bring to patients, and which is ultimately the goal. Patient satisfaction is ultimately the goal there. So I'm waiting to see what MD Anderson does, but we have not embraced that just yet.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So I have one other question. So what system, I don't know if we talked about this, what systems do you guys use besides like Excel?
Excel. Now, we are actually in the middle of putting in a CTMS. And so we're actually implementing Encore, and Kelly Teeler is our project director on that effort. And then we have Epic on the back end, which Victoria is our Epic guru, and she knows everything Epic. So we're going to have Encore for our CTMS, and the back end side will be done through Epic.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any more questions? I'll say now, we just have another one. This will probably be our last one. Let's see. In the past, I've applied for financial analyst positions. Hold on, mine went off. Okay. In companies that say that they don't require a background in healthcare. However, when I go to the interviews, it's a different story. How flexible is this requirement at MD Anderson?
It really just depends on the position you're applying for, Jennifer. So in our department, we have a posted job description, and we really strictly adhere to that. Because like Victoria told you, the back end pieces, we're looking for someone who has coding experience. Front end pieces, I'm looking for somebody either to have a scientific background and help us interpret those studies into the financial document, or have a strong finance background and can help us with the budgeting aspects of it. So we adhere to that pretty much. I know some of our departments really try to focus on getting a warm body because they really just need to keep moving these studies through a pipeline, but then they ultimately realize that that particular individual doesn't have the skill set that they really need to do the job. And so they're actually learning from that experience as well. So I'm not quite sure if you've applied at Anderson before and you've had this experience, but you can also touch base with me through LinkedIn, and I'm happy to discuss it with you.
See another connection. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Shoot your network.
I'll say, shoot your professional shot. Go ahead.
That's exactly it.
Okay.
That's exactly it.
Well, thank you, ladies, so much for telling us more about clinical research finance. I feel like, you know, this is foreign to me. So you guys have taught me a lot about clinical research finance. And I think really the take home, you know, is to network. I know we said that quite a few times, but do not be afraid to reach out. If you are interested in a certain field in the clinical research industry, reach out to someone that's in this field that you admire their position, you see their activity on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid to, you know, put yourself out there and just see where it goes from there. And so I know we also talked about thinking outside of the box and being creative when it comes to clinical research finance and wearing multiple hats and being able to learn something new. So if you had any last thoughts that you wanted to say, please feel free.
First and foremost, thank you for reaching out and networking with us to get us over here. I appreciate being able to address this audience and really helping individuals understand how to get into clinical research finance. And like I said before, I'm serious about the networking piece. So reach out to me on LinkedIn and I'm happy to connect and talk through it of what your aspirations are. Because not only am I working at Anderson doing this piece, but I'm also coaching and doing executive coaching. So happy to help you guys as well.
Okay. I might be reaching out. I need some executive coaching.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Victoria?
I would say the same thing. Thank you guys for having us. This was really fun to do and just kind of be able to talk about it, what we do in a different manner than being at work all day. So just thank you guys for having us. Hopefully our conversation and dialogue was helpful for you. And I'm looking at your comments in the chat. And so seems like we did a great job today. So just thank you for having us. And definitely if you have any questions or want to network, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and we'll be happy to help. And I can second that Mary is an excellent coach.
Thank you.
Yes. And so I always tell people, especially at the end of our Zoom meetings, to feel free to drop your LinkedIn URL in the chat box so that way people can connect with you, because a lot of times you might have a name where it's just one letter and so, or it might be your alias. So yes, please feel free to drop your LinkedIn information in the chat so that everyone can connect with you. And I'll just leave this up for a few, but thank you guys so much. This was great. You have a good night.
Thank you. Had a good time.
Thank
Take care.
you. Good night.
Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.